The laughing started before Daniel Mercer even reached his seat. It was quiet at first. Just one voice near the far side of the boardroom table. Then another. Then a short burst of polite laughter somebody tried and failed to hide behind a coffee cup. Daniel heard all of it before he even touched the door handle. The boardroom on the 42nd floor overlooked downtown Chicago through floor-to-ceiling glass. Morning sunlight reflected off steel and windows across the skyline. Inside, everything looked expensive. The walnut conference table stretched nearly 20 feet long. Leather chairs, bottled water lined in perfect rows. Silver pens beside every folder. Caroline Hayes stood near the head of the table in a cream-colored tailored blazer and black slacks, one hand resting lightly against a stack of acquisition documents. Calm, precise, fully in control, Daniel stepped in carrying a thin black folder under one arm. His charcoal suit was older than everyone else's in the room. Perfectly clean, well-fitted, but worn enough that someone paying attention could notice the shine beginning to fade at the elbows. He had arrived 2 minutes late. Not because he was careless, because Emma had missed the school drop-off line and forgotten her lunchbox on the kitchen counter and insisted he not leave until she found the drawing she wanted him to keep in his pocket all day. That was real life. Boardrooms did not care about real life. A board member near the windows glanced up and smirked. Cutting it close, Daniel. Another man leaned back. Traffic. A woman near the legal team added with a smile she clearly thought was harmless. Or parent-teacher conference. A couple people laughed again. Daniel closed the door behind him. Quietly. No hurry. Caroline looked at him for one measured second. Not smiling. Not helping either. Good morning, she said. Her voice was polished enough to flatten the room slightly. Daniel nodded once. Morning. He walked toward the final open chair at the far end of the table. One of the board members, a tall man named Gerald Whitaker with a silver tie and a habit of talking louder than necessary, looked Daniel up and down before turning. Toward the others. You would think a board meeting tied to a $90 million acquisition might call for a newer suit. A few chuckles. Somebody shifted in their seat. Daniel pulled his chair out and sat down without saying anything. He set his folder on the table, straightened it, folded his hands. Gerald leaned back with a grin. Or at least a tie that made it out of the last decade. That got a bigger laugh. Caroline glanced at Gerald but said nothing. Daniel looked toward the windows. Chicago traffic moving far below. A helicopter crossing the river. Sun reflecting off the lake in the distance. Then he reached into his inside pocket and felt folded paper. Emma's drawing. Still there. Good. Gerald noticed. Did we interrupt something? Daniel looked up. Calm. No, Caroline finally stepped forward. Can we begin? The room settled. Chairs adjusted. Coffee cups lowered. But a few smiles remained around the table. The kind that linger after somebody decides exactly where you rank before hearing you say a single word. Caroline opened the folder in front of her. Thank you all for being here. Today we finalized terms on the Halcyon acquisition. Daniel stayed still at the end of the table. Quiet. Listening. While one board member beside Gerald whispered something low enough that he probably thought nobody else heard. Still cannot believe he has voting authority. Another quiet laugh. Daniel did not react. He kept one hand resting against the inside pocket of his jacket where Emma's drawing sat folded flat against his chest. And while the city kept moving outside that wall of glass and Caroline Hayes began speaking at the head of the table, nobody in that room noticed Daniel Mercer had not opened his folder yet. He had not touched a pen, and he had not said a single word. Caroline Hayes had the kind of voice people trusted before they even realized they were agreeing with her. Calm, clear, controlled. She stood at the head of the walnut table with downtown Chicago shining behind her through 40 feet of glass and moved through the acquisition documents without looking down once. Halcyon Technologies gives us immediate expansion into 5 new markets. She said, projected revenue growth over the next 18 months places this ahead of every opportunity we reviewed this year. Heads nodded around the table. Pens moved. Gerald Whitaker crossed one leg over the other and smiled like he had already decided the meeting was over before it began. Caroline clicked the remote in her hand. Charts appeared on the wall display. Revenue curves. Forecasts. Expansion maps. Everything polished. Everything clean. Daniel Mercer sat at the end of the table without touching his folder. His chair angled slightly toward the windows. Quiet. Watching. Caroline noticed. She noticed everything. But she kept moving. The board has reviewed legal summaries and financial projections. If there are no final concerns, we will move to signatures within the next 20 minutes. Gerald leaned forward immediately. I am ready now. A few people murmured agreement. One woman, near legal, adjusted her glasses and nodded. Same here. Daniel stayed still. Caroline looked his way briefly. Daniel. His eyes lifted. Still reviewing. Gerald laughed softly. Reviewing what exactly? Daniel did not answer. Caroline shifted the room back. We have time. Another slide changed. She explained distribution assets and acquisition timing, while city traffic glowed below like moving silver threads. Daniel listened without moving. Then his phone buzzed once against the table. Small. Quiet. He glanced down. Emma. A photo message. A sheet of paper covered in bright crayons. A crooked office building with stick figures standing near the top. One taller. One smaller. And in messy blue letters. Good luck, Dad, love you. Daniel looked at it for half a second. Just long enough. Then locked the screen and slid the phone face down beside his folder. Gerald noticed. Business must be intense this morning. A few smiles again. Daniel said nothing. Caroline kept her voice level. Final legal clearance was completed yesterday. Risk exposure remains minimal. Minimal. Gerald grinned toward Daniel. See? Even legal likes this one. Another board member turned in Daniel's direction. You have not said much today. Not yet, Daniel answered. Simple. Caroline clicked to the final summary page. Then let us bring this to vote. Gerald reached immediately for his silver pen. The woman beside him did the same. Another board member opened the signature packet. Daniel did not. Caroline noticed that too. Her eyes landed on the untouched folder in front of him. Daniel. He looked up. Do you need more time? His answer came calm. Maybe. Gerald shook his head and smiled like he had been waiting for this. We all know what this is. Caroline stayed still. Gerald continued. Every big move gets one holdout. Somebody wants attention. Somebody wants leverage. A couple people avoided eye contact. Others smiled into coffee cups. Gerald looked straight at Daniel now. If you have concerns, say them. Daniel rested one hand lightly over Emma's folded drawing inside his jacket pocket. Caroline watched that small movement, then looked back at his face. Still unreadable. Still calm. I am listening, she said. Daniel glanced once toward the skyline. The lake, bright in the distance. Sun reflecting off another tower across the street. Then back to the papers. Go ahead, Gerald added. Or sign. Pens rested above signature lines. Coffee cups sat untouched. The boardroom suddenly felt quieter than before. Not tense yet, but moving there. Caroline stood at the head of the table with the acquisition packet in front of her. Daniel sat at the far end with his folder still closed. And for the first time that morning, everyone in that room started paying attention to him. Daniel Mercer looked down at the unopened signature packet in front of him and then back up at the people around the table. No hurry. No nervousness. Just calm. The kind that made other people uncomfortable because it gave them nothing to react to. Gerald Whitaker twirled his silver pen between his fingers. Well, Daniel rested one hand flat against the table. I am still thinking. Gerald gave a short laugh. About what exactly? Caroline Hayes stayed at the head of the room, quiet for the moment, watching Daniel more closely than before. He glanced at the final page of the acquisition packet, then at the skyline outside the glass. Timing. Gerald leaned back. Timing. Yes. Another board member, near legal, frowned. We have been reviewing this deal for weeks. Daniel nodded once. I know. Gerald spread one hand. Then what are we waiting for? Daniel did not answer immediately. His phone buzzed again. A second message from Emma. Just text this time. Did you remember to breathe today? Daniel almost smiled. Almost. He locked the screen and slid the phone aside. Gerald saw it. Maybe the boardroom is not the right place for parenting reminders. That got another small round of laughter. Even someone near the windows smiled into their coffee. Daniel stayed still. Caroline looked toward Gerald. Not sharp enough to stop him. Not soft enough to approve it either. Gerald kept going. This is exactly why some people should not hold executive voting authority. Silence followed that one for a second. A little heavier. Daniel looked at him. You done? Gerald smiled wider. Depends. You signing? The woman from legal turned toward Daniel. If there is a concern, now is the time. Caroline stepped forward slightly. Daniel, if you see something we missed, say it. Her tone was controlled. Professional. But clearer now. More direct. Daniel looked at her for one long second, then opened his folder for the first time all morning. Not a thick binder, just a few sheets. Handwritten notes. One highlighted printout. Gerald glanced at it and actually laughed. That is what held this up. Daniel ignored him and read one line, then closed the folder again. I need another minute. Gerald dropped his pen on the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. Unbelievable. Caroline folded her arms. Gerald, he turned toward her. No, we all know what this is. Every major deal gets one person trying to feel important. He looked straight at Daniel again. You came in late. You have not contributed one useful thing. You are holding up a $90 million vote because of handwritten notes and a phone buzzing with school messages. The woman beside Gerald looked down at her papers. Someone farther down the table shifted awkwardly. Nobody interrupted. Gerald continued. If you understood this level of business, you would have signed 10 minutes ago. That one landed harder than the others. Quiet afterward. Daniel sat back slightly in his chair. Caroline looked between them. For 1 second, she seemed ready to step in. But she did not. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket, touched Emma's folded drawing, then looked up at Gerald. You really think so? Gerald smiled. Absolutely. Daniel nodded once. Okay. Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly. Gerald leaned forward like he expected surrender now. Pens rested above signature pages. Coffee cooled beside untouched folders. Traffic moved below on Wacker Drive. The legal team waited. The skyline reflected across the glass. Daniel placed both hands flat on the table and looked at the papers in front of Caroline, then at Gerald, then around the room. And suddenly, every single person there stopped pretending this was routine and waited for him to speak. Daniel Mercer looked directly at Gerald Whitaker and spoke in the same calm tone he had used all morning. Then let me ask one question before you sign. Nobody moved. Gerald leaned back with an impatient smile. Go ahead. Daniel looked at the acquisition packet in front of him, then toward Caroline Hayes at the head of the table, who approved transferring 42% equity to Blackwell Strategic Holdings under the revised terms. The room went still. Not dramatic, just immediate. Pen stopped. One board member halfway through opening a folder froze with her hand on the paper. Gerald's smile faded a little. Caroline looked down at the contract in front of her, then back up. Blackwell is listed as the external capital group. Daniel nodded once. Correct. Gerald folded his arms. And Daniel looked at him. And Blackwell Strategic Holdings has been under federal review for 6 weeks. Silence. Complete. Nobody laughed. Nobody shifted. Even the HVAC humming above them suddenly felt louder. Caroline's expression changed first. Not panic. Focus. Sharp and immediate. What? Daniel opened his folder again and slid a single highlighted page across the table toward her. Filed 6 weeks ago. Public record. Caroline picked it up. Read the first paragraph. Then the second. Her eyes narrowed. Gerald leaned toward her. That cannot be right. Daniel answered before Caroline could. It is. The legal counsel on the far side of the room reached for her laptop, so quickly her coffee cup rattled against the table. Another board member grabbed his phone. Gerald looked from Daniel to the highlighted page. That information was not included. Daniel nodded. That is why I did not sign. Caroline kept reading. One page. Then another. She looked up at Daniel. How did you catch this? I read the amendment. Gerald forced a short laugh. Weak now. No legal team missed that. Daniel met his eyes. Yours did. The attorney near the windows stopped typing. He is right. Her voice was low, but everyone heard it. Blackwell was flagged last month. The investigation was disclosed. Nobody said a word after that. The city outside kept moving. A train crossing the river. Sun reflecting off mirrored glass towers. But inside the boardroom, everything felt locked in place. Gerald slowly sat back in his chair. Caroline lowered the papers and looked straight at Daniel. Really looked this time. Like she was seeing him clearly for the first time since he walked in wearing the older charcoal suit and carrying the thin black folder nobody respected. Daniel stayed exactly the same. Calm. Hands folded. No victory in his face. No anger. Just stillness. The attorney spoke again. If we sign today, we expose the company to serious legal risk. Another board member closed his folder immediately. The sound echoed. Then another did the same. Gerald stared at the table, one hand still resting beside the silver pen he had been so eager to use. Caroline asked quietly, Why did you wait? Daniel glanced toward the skyline, then back at her. I gave everyone time to read it first. That landed harder than anything else he had said, because everybody in that room knew exactly what he meant. They had laughed, pressured him, tried to rush him, and he had still given them every chance to notice what they missed. Caroline set the highlighted page down slowly, her voice lower now. Meeting paused. No one argued. No one questioned it. The attorney kept typing. Gerald looked pale. A board member whispered to another. And Daniel. Mercer sat at the far end of the table with Emma's folded drawing in his jacket pocket, while 42 floors above Chicago. Nobody in that room made a sound. No one reached for a pen after that. The boardroom stayed frozen in a silence so complete it almost felt strange against the city moving beyond the glass. Caroline Hayes stood at the head of the table with the highlighted disclosure still in her hand. Her eyes moved across the page one more time, then to the legal counsel. Confirm it. The attorney nodded immediately and kept typing. Fast now. Focused. Gerald Whitaker cleared his throat and adjusted his silver tie. The confidence from 10 minutes earlier was gone. There has to be context missing. Daniel Mercer looked at him. There is not. Gerald forced a smile that did not land. Federal review does not automatically mean wrongdoing. Daniel nodded once. No, but it means disclosure matters. The attorney looked up from her laptop. He is right. Her voice came out sharper this time. This was filed publicly 38 days ago. It should have been attached to the revised packet. Gerald turned toward her. Then why was it not? Nobody answered. Caroline slowly lowered the page onto the walnut table. Her expression stayed controlled but colder now. Not at Daniel. At the stack of paperwork in front of her. One board member quietly shut his folder. Then another. The sound repeated around the room. Daniel sat still with his hands folded. The same as before. He had not changed at all. Caroline noticed that more than anything. Gerald looked toward Daniel again. You knew this when you walked in? Yes. And you waited until now? Yes. Gerald stared. Why? Daniel's answer came simple. Because everyone else had the same documents I did. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody even looked away. Caroline turned toward him. You expected us to catch it. Daniel met her eyes. I hoped someone would. That landed hard. The attorney closed her laptop halfway and rubbed her forehead. A board member near the windows exhaled slowly. We nearly signed this. Another answered under his breath. 5 minutes from now we would have. Gerald shifted in his chair. Daniel, he stopped. Tried again. I may have spoken too quickly earlier. Daniel gave a slight nod. Maybe. Gerald looked down at the silver pen beside his folder and pushed it away. Caroline stepped around the head of the table and stopped halfway between her chair and Daniel's seat. Did you bring this up with anyone before the meeting? No, why not? Daniel glanced briefly toward the skyline. The Chicago River catching sunlight below. Then back to her. Because if I emailed it last night, someone would have buried it in a chain and hoped legal handled it. People pay attention when the pen is already in their hand. One board member actually gave a short breath of laughter. Not because it was funny, because it was true. Caroline looked at Daniel for a long second, then at the folded folder he had carried in. Thin, plain, easy to dismiss. Gerald rubbed one hand over his face. I owe you an apology. Daniel said nothing. Gerald added quietly, a real one. Daniel kept his voice even. Not the first boardroom I have been underestimated in. That made Caroline pause. She studied him again. The older charcoal suit. The calm expression. The way he had absorbed every comment thrown his way and never once rushed to defend himself. The attorney reopened her laptop. We need a full review before this proceeds. Agreed, Caroline said immediately. One board member nodded. Then another. The vote was gone. The signatures forgotten. And the room had fully shifted. Gerald finally looked straight at Daniel. How did you catch it that fast? Daniel rested one hand lightly over the inside pocket of his jacket where Emma's folded drawing still Saturday. I read every line. The attorney gave a small nod. Respectful now. Caroline stepped back toward the head of the table, but did not sit. She looked at Daniel and asked more quietly than before. Anything else we missed? Daniel opened his folder one more time, turned a page, then looked up. Actually, yes. And the entire boardroom went still again. Daniel Mercer looked down at the page in his folder and turned it toward Caroline Hayes without saying anything at first. The movement alone was enough to bring every eye back to him. The boardroom had already shifted once. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. Caroline stepped closer and took the page. What is this? Daniel answered calmly. Halcyon's retention numbers. Gerald Whitaker leaned forward. Those were in the packet. Not these. Daniel pointed to the lower right corner. Internal numbers from last quarter. The legal counsel stood from her chair and walked closer. Caroline scanned the page. Her eyes moved faster this time. She had stopped underestimating him 15 minutes ago. Turnover? She asked. Daniel nodded. 31% in management. Gerald frowned. That is high. Daniel met his eyes. It is very high. Caroline read again. These were not disclosed. No, where did you get them? Daniel rested back in his chair. A former regional director called me last week. Gerald blinked. Called you? Daniel nodded once. He was worried nobody on this board had seen the actual retention numbers. The attorney stepped closer to Caroline and read over her shoulder. Her expression changed immediately. If this is accurate, Daniel answered quietly. It is. Another board member stood. Why would management turnover matter that much? Daniel looked toward the skyline for 1 second, then back. Because when leadership leaves that fast before an acquisition closes, he paused. People are running from something. The room went quiet again. Caroline lowered the page slowly. You verified this? Twice. How? Direct calls. Employment records. State filings. Gerald stared at him like he was looking at a completely different person than the man he mocked earlier. You did all that yourself? Daniel shrugged lightly. I had a week. That almost made someone laugh from disbelief, but nobody did. Caroline looked down at the papers in front of her, then at the untouched signature pages, then back at Daniel. You knew both issues before this morning. Yes. And still came here and let the presentation continue. Daniel nodded. I wanted to hear if anyone caught either one. The words landed hard, harder than before, because now there were 2 missed issues, not one, and everyone knew it. Gerald slowly sat back and rubbed his forehead. The attorney closed her laptop and looked straight at Caroline. This deal cannot move forward. Agreed, Caroline said immediately. Her voice stayed steady, but quieter now. A board member near the windows whispered under his breath. That was close. Another answered, too close. Daniel reached for his phone when it buzzed again. Emma. One new text. Did you win the meeting? Daniel read it and smiled for the first time all morning. Small. Real. He typed back quickly. Still working on it. Caroline noticed that. The expression softened something in her face. Then she asked the question nobody had expected earlier. Daniel, why are you on this board? Gerald looked up at that. So did everyone else. Daniel locked his phone and set it down. 3 years ago, your founder asked me to review one acquisition during restructuring. Caroline stayed quiet. Daniel continued. I found a problem. He asked me to stay on. Gerald stared. That was you. Daniel nodded. Yes. The room absorbed that slowly. Caroline looked at him differently now. No distance left. No edge. Just clear respect. The attorney gathered the documents. Signature packets were closed. Pens were put away. Outside the glass, Chicago kept moving like nothing had happened. But inside that boardroom, everything had changed. Gerald looked toward Daniel and gave the smallest nod. Honest this time. Caroline stood at the head of the table and exhaled once. Meeting adjourned. Nobody rushed out. Nobody spoke over each other. They simply sat there for another moment in the quiet. And Daniel Mercer, wearing the same older charcoal suit they laughed at when he walked in, reached into his pocket, unfolded Emma's crayon drawing, and looked at it while the entire room stayed silent around him. For a few seconds after Caroline Hayes said the meeting was adjourned, nobody stood up. The city kept moving outside the glass walls like usual. Taxis below, reflections sliding across neighboring towers. But inside the boardroom the air felt completely different than it had an hour ago. Daniel Mercer folded Emma's crayon drawing carefully and slipped it back into his inside jacket pocket. Then he closed his folder and reached for his phone. He was halfway through standing when Gerald Whitaker spoke. Daniel. The room paused again. Daniel looked up. Gerald stayed seated for a second, like he was choosing the words carefully. Then he stood. No smile now. No silver-tongued confidence. Just direct eye contact. I owe you an apology. Daniel waited. Gerald exhaled slowly. For what I said earlier. About your suit. About your authority. All of it. Nobody interrupted. Gerald glanced briefly at the table. I was wrong. Daniel gave one small nod. Okay. Gerald almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, Because Daniel somehow made everything sound simpler than it felt. Caroline watched the exchange from the head of the table. Then the legal counsel stood and closed her laptop. Daniel, she said quietly. Thank you. Another board member followed. Same here. Then another voice near the windows. Seriously. One by one it happened naturally. No speeches. No dramatic moment. Just real acknowledgement. Daniel stayed calm through all of it. Caroline finally stepped away from the head of the table and walked toward him. Her heels sounded sharper now in the quiet room. She stopped a few feet away. Can I ask you something? Daniel nodded. Sure. Caroline glanced at the closed folders spread across the walnut table. When Gerald started in on you this morning, she paused. Why did you not say anything? Daniel looked toward the skyline, then back at her. Because it would not have changed anything. Caroline frowned slightly. You knew you were right. That is different. Different how? Daniel answered without hesitation. People listen harder after they underestimate you. That stopped her cold for a second. Gerald heard it too and looked down at the table. Caroline crossed her arms loosely. That sounds practiced. Daniel gave the faintest smile. Single dad with full custody and a board seat? You learn a few things. A couple people smiled at that. Caroline looked at him differently now. Softer. Emma texted you during the meeting. Daniel nodded. She wanted to know if I remembered to breathe. That made Caroline laugh under her breath. Genuine this time. Smart kid. Very. Gerald picked up his silver pen and slid it back into his jacket pocket. How old is she? 7. And she drew that picture? Daniel nodded. Before school. Gerald shook his head slowly. Meanwhile, I was worried about the wrong things all morning. The boardroom loosened after that. The tension drained. One board member gathered folders. Another grabbed coffee. But no one rushed away. Caroline looked at Daniel. I meant what I said earlier. Thank you. You do not need to thank me. Actually, I do. She glanced toward the contract stack. You probably saved this company from a disaster today. Daniel shrugged lightly. Then it was a useful morning. His phone buzzed again. Emma, are you done yet? Daniel typed back quickly. Almost. See you soon. Caroline noticed and smiled. Then she asked quietly, heading straight to pick her up? In about 40 minutes. Lunch first. Daniel shook his head. School cafeteria pizza day. Caroline smiled wider. That explains the urgency. Daniel closed his folder under one arm. Gerald stepped aside as he walked toward the door. Several board members moved automatically to give him room. Respectful now. Natural. No one had to say it. Daniel reached the glass door, and Caroline called after him one last time. Daniel. He turned. Caroline stood in the middle of the boardroom with Chicago shining behind her. Next time, do not wait until the last minute to speak. Daniel gave the smallest smile. Then nobody would listen this closely. A few quiet laughs followed. Real ones this time. And when Daniel Mercer stepped into the hallway with the older charcoal suit they had mocked an hour earlier, nobody inside that boardroom laughed after he was gone. The hallway outside the boardroom felt cooler than the room Daniel Mercer had just left. The sound of the door closing behind him softened everything at once. No voices. No papers sliding across polished wood. Just the low hum of the building and sunlight pouring through the glass wall overlooking the Chicago River. Daniel adjusted his folder under one arm and checked the time on his phone. 11:23. Enough time. Emma's school pickup was at noon. He started walking toward the elevators when he heard heels behind him. Quick, then slowing. Daniel. Caroline Hayes. He turned. She had followed him out alone. No board members. No legal team. Just Caroline standing a few feet away in her cream blazer with one hand lightly against the hallway wall, as if she had hurried more than she wanted him to notice. For a second, neither of them said anything. Daniel waited. Caroline glanced toward the windows. The city bright and moving below. Then back at him. I wanted to say this without everyone in the room watching. Daniel nodded once. Okay. She folded her arms loosely. Not defensive, just steadying herself. I should have stopped Gerald sooner. Daniel did not answer right away. Caroline gave a small breath. Actually, I should have said something before Gerald even started. Daniel looked at her. Maybe. Caroline almost smiled at that. That sounds nicer than I deserve. Daniel shifted the folder slightly. People miss things. I missed more than one thing today. Her voice was honest now. No executive polish left in it. I saw your suit. I saw you coming late. I saw your phone light up with school messages. She shook her head. And I decided who you were before you said a word. Daniel looked out through the glass. A tour boat moving slowly along the river below. then back to her. Most people do. Caroline gave a short laugh under her breath. That should not make me feel better. It was not supposed to. That made her smile for real. Then Daniel's phone buzzed again. Emma. Pick up soon, Dad. Do not forget. He smiled reading it. Caroline noticed immediately. That is her. Yeah. 7. Caroline nodded slowly. My dad forgot me once after school. Daniel looked up. Really? One time. 15 minutes late. I still remember exactly how long it felt. Daniel smiled faintly. Then I should probably move. Caroline glanced toward the elevators and then back at him. Before you go, she hesitated. Were you serious in there? About hoping someone else would catch it? Yes. Even after the comments? Daniel shrugged. The company matters more than comments. Caroline studied him for a long second. That is either incredibly disciplined or impossible. Probably both. She laughed softly, then looked down at the folder in his hand. You always carry notes like that? Usually. And actually read every page? Every line. Caroline shook her head. I spent 6 hours with that acquisition packet. Daniel answered simply. I spent 7. Another quiet beat passed. Then Caroline stepped a little closer. Daniel, next time we walk into a boardroom together, she paused. I will pay attention sooner. He nodded. Fair enough. The elevator doors opened at the end of the hall with a soft chime. Daniel took a step toward them. Caroline stopped him one last time. Emma drew that picture before school. She did. Tell her she helped save a company today. Daniel smiled wider than before. She would probably ask if that means pizza tonight. Caroline laughed. Then yes, definitely pizza. Daniel stepped into the elevator. The doors stayed open for 1 second longer. Caroline stood in the hallway with Chicago bright behind her. Daniel. He looked up. Thanks for staying calm in there. Daniel rested one hand over the folded drawing in his pocket. Had to. My daughter was counting on me to show up smiling. The doors closed gently. Caroline stood there a second longer, watching the reflection disappear into polished steel. Then she turned back toward the boardroom. And for the first time that day, she walked in listening before she spoke. Daniel Mercer stepped out of the elevator into the lobby and crossed the polished marble floor with his folder tucked under one arm and his phone in his hand. Chicago sunlight poured through the glass entrance and lit the sidewalk outside. 11:56. Just enough time. He pushed through the revolving door and headed toward the curb where his older gray sedan sat parked between black SUVs and a delivery van. The city sounded normal out there. Taxi horns. Footsteps. Someone calling for coffee from across the street. Nothing about the outside world looked different. But Daniel felt the quiet after the boardroom settle in as he unlocked the car and slid behind the wheel. His phone buzzed again before he even started the engine. Emma, are you close? Daniel smiled and typed back. Pulling out now. Do not let anyone take the good swing. Her reply came instantly. Too late. He laughed under his breath and started the car. 15 minutes later, he pulled into the pickup lane outside Lincoln Elementary. Parents lined the curb. Teachers guiding kids out the front doors. Emma spotted him before he even rolled to a full stop. Blonde ponytail bouncing, bright blue backpack swinging, smile wide enough to reach him through the windshield. She ran over, opened the passenger door, and climbed in fast. You made it. Daniel glanced at the dashboard clock. Noon on the dot. Told you. Emma buckled herself and studied him immediately. So, Daniel pulled away from the curb. So what? Did you win the meeting? Daniel smiled at the road. Kind of. Emma narrowed her eyes. That sounds like grown-up talk. It usually is. She crossed her arms dramatically. Did anybody say sorry? Daniel laughed. Actually, yes. More than one. Yes. Emma looked very satisfied with that answer. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out another drawing. Fresh crayon lines. A tall office building with tiny windows and one stick figure wearing what looked like a cape. I made this at recess. Daniel glanced over. That is me. Obviously. I look taller. That is because you were saving the company. Daniel laughed again and shook his head. They stopped at a red light. Daniel looked down at the picture, then back at the road. Emma leaned against the seat. Did the mean people stop laughing? He nodded once. Yeah. Good. How was pizza day? Pretty amazing. Then she looked over. You okay? Daniel glanced at her and smiled. Yeah, kiddo. I am good. Back downtown on the 42nd floor, Caroline Hayes stood alone in the empty boardroom. The folders had been cleared. Coffee cups gone. The city still shining through the glass walls. Daniel's highlighted pages rested near her hand. Gerald had already left. Legal was reviewing everything again. Caroline looked at the chair Daniel sat in that morning, then at the spot where he stood before walking out. She remembered the older charcoal suit, the quiet, the patience, the way he had never raised his voice once. Then she picked up her phone and sent one short message. "Thank you again. And next time I will listen first." A minute later, Daniel's phone buzzed at a stoplight. He read the message, smiled, then set the phone back down. Emma looked over. Who was that? Work. Important. Daniel checked the light, turning green. Less important than lunch. Emma grinned. Good answer. They drove north through Chicago traffic with sunlight reflecting off windows and the sound of Emma talking about recess and math and why cafeteria pizza somehow tasted better than regular pizza. Daniel listened. Come again. Easy. Like the whole morning had already started fading into the background. And maybe that is the thing people forget when they judge too fast. The loudest person in the room is not always the one holding everything together. Sometimes it is the quiet one at the end of the table. The one everyone overlooks. The one carrying handwritten notes in one pocket and a child's crayon drawing in the other. Because real strength usually does not walk in demanding attention. It walks in quietly, tells the truth when it matters, and leaves with nothing left to prove.